I don't know how well this is going to end up working out, but I'm going to try doing my first ever review of a game, but instead of doing the typical kind of review where you open the box and look at the counters and rules and all that stuff, I'm going to focus on reviewing the gameplay. So the game, as you can tell by the title, is World War 85, Storming the Gap. It's my current go-to game, like sort of current tied for second favorite game after Napoleon's triumph. And I'm in the middle of soloing a scenario, and some really cool and intense stuff has been happening in that scenario. So I'm going to quickly go over how the game works itself, talk about the units and the rules and in general and things like that, and using the vassal module for all of this. And then I'm going to do a recap of the first 7 turns of that scenario to demonstrate why I think this game is so superb. What I will say about the physical components of this game is I believe they're fantastic. Um, when I kickstarted this, the amount of material I got in the mail for that Kickstarter was stunning to me. By far, the best value for dollar spent I've ever had from investing in a game. Um, just incredible. So, the first thing that I would say about why I love this game is that it is endlessly replayable. So this is some stuff about the units, but we'll come back there. We're going to first talk about the maps. So here we're switching to a different Vassal module screen. So you get these different maps, and I believe these are called geomorphic maps. You'll notice this one says O1S and this one says O1W. That's because you can have a winter, a summer version, or a winter version of the identical map, and the seasons do make some difference in the way the game plays. And the way that you use these maps is so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I probably should have counted these. 2, 3, so maybe 30 different maps or so. But the combinations that you can make from 30 different maps, but half are winter, half are summer, so whatever, 16 maybe. The combinations you can make from these are endless. So you can choose map 1 as a summer map, and you could just play on that. One map scenario. They're fun and intense. You could make the map a little bit longer and come down here and pick a different map, and you could pick map 3. And so you could see how these connect here, right? Or you could flip this, and oh, look, they connect. So the way these maps are made, no matter which way you flip them around, they connect with each other in a sensible way in terms of terrain. So you can make a scenario as many maps wide and as many maps deep as you have maps for. You could, if you wanted to deal with it, use the winter and the summer versions of the same maps. So I'll show you a couple of versions of that. Here is down here in the lower left. You see this is map number 45. Notice this hillock here, and then the city up above it. And this over here you see in the upper right is map 2. So now I'm going to show you a map, winter version of a map with the same 2 maps, but look, now you have map 2, the number 2 in this bottom left hand corner, and the number 45 in the bottom right hand corner. Notice this hillock here. So you see what I'm talking about, right? This is a big city here. This is actually Frankfurt, or part of the amazing defense of Frankfurt scenario. So the first part of endless replayability is that you have a potential to make maps to your heart's content. You could even, if you wanted to, make a wacky map combination like this. I don't know what you'd be simulating. Maybe that there is some very strict orders for both sides not to impede on this area of operation over here or something. I've never done it. I've never seen it. But you could do it if you want to. Endless. And so the way the maps work gives you endless amounts of replayability. The other thing that makes this game endlessly replayable is that it is a chit pull game, except that it uses cards instead of chits. So you could play the exact same scenario over and over and over again, and you would have monkeys banging typewriters create the plays of Shakespeare as fast as you ever had any 2 games happen exactly the same way. But they would almost all be pretty tense intriguing games, I think. And there are lots and lots of different units to choose from. There are a lot of scenarios already in this module. There's another module coming out probably late this year, it sounds like, that adds British forces. So the current Storming the Gap module has United States, West German forces facing off against the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. If there was a unit fielded in 1985, it's in this game. I'm sure of it. All kinds of stuff: air support, helicopters, onboard artillery, offboard artillery, self-propelled mortars, actual mortars, helicopter assaults, parachute drops, special forces, anti-tank guns, towed anti-tank guns. Didn't think that was a thing in 1985, but the Russians have one, and all of the stuff that that M1, the Leopard 2, and then with the British you get. I like the British vehicles and the Swedish vehicles the best. So that Swedish vehicles come later. So I should say specifically, the Swedish vehicles haven't been announced or anything. This game was originally published quite a long time ago it's a very similar game, somewhat different format, but they just kept releasing modules on that, and each module would introduce forces from a new nation. So Sweden had this cool turretless tank that had this great shoot and scoot ability. I loved it. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Every game of this that I've ever played is tense and exciting. Even if it seems like this is about to be a blowout, it always ends up being tense and exciting. Like I said, it's got cool units, and the narrative that this game creates, to me, is as good as any narrative of any game I've ever played. My gold standard for a game that creates a compelling, interesting narrative is Combat Commander Pacific, and this game is right up there with that. When I go into the recap of my scenario, I will specifically talk about the different narratives that I've seen happen in there, and the way that I think this game uses the rules and mechanics of the game to represent things that likely would have happened if World War III had broken out, and things that probably did happen during other wars. But we'll get to that in a minute. So that is what I like about the game. Now let's talk just a little bit about the rules and how the game works. This is one of the player aids. This game is chock full of player aids. I actually found the format of many of the player aids and the number of player aids to be kind of confusing and overwhelming. But the player aids like this one that were useful are super useful. This gives you information, all the information that you need to know about the units. And I'm not going to go over everything here, but the basics are on a unit's counter, on the upper left corner are statistics for its armor-piercing firepower. So this is the main gun of this tank, which is a T-62. And in the upper right-hand corner are the statistics for the high explosive firepower, which for these tanks would be the machine guns, and then if it's an armored vehicle, this value here represents how effective its armor is at what's called saving hits, how many movement points you can get, and if the unit does an assault where they roll into each other and do close quarters fighting, it rolls this many dice and needs this to hit. And the way these numbers work is this first number is the range. This second number is the number of dice that you roll, and this number is the number that you need to roll above, equal to or above, to score a hit. So this unit, in its most basic iteration, firing at another tank, would roll 3 dice, needing 5 hits. Needing a 5 or better to score a hit. Most units are 2-step units. They can be disrupted for 1 hit, reduced for a 2nd hit, and eliminated for a 3rd hit. They rally. A lot of that is very typical stuff from war games. You can see here they got all kinds of different things. Right, here's the Bradley. These different colors of the dice that are rolled indicate different types of weapon systems, how effective the unit is, if at all, in moving and firing. It loses some effectiveness doing that. Usually the NATO units are more effective at that than others. Look at this. The Munga. I love this. 106mm recoilless rifle mounted in a Jeep. Like, that's a technical in, like Somalia or something like that, right? But this was part of the German territorial defenses, and in fact, in one of the scenarios, they show up. You get parachute units, air assault units that can come in on helicopters, units that get towed, air support over here, helicopters, all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to go all through the rules, but that's the way it basically works. You have firepower to pierce armor, you have firepower for soft-skinned units. In some cases, like the Bradley is a notable exception, there are others. There is a high explosive firepower that fires at a high enough rate of speed that it could actually damage armored vehicles. And some units have the ability to call in artillery fire. There's all kinds of artillery, mortars, infantry personnel carriers, from pretty cruddy ones to like BTRs. Anyhow, all kinds of stuff. This right here is what's called a formation card. And when we start talking about how the game is replayable and why the game is so intense, this card matters a lot. The formation cards have a formation name and a color, and the color of the stripe here is going to match the unit. So this formation here, if it was in a scenario with this unit, would probably be its formation. They're the same color, not necessarily, but probably. It's the morale, the training value, and the what is called the command range. If the headquarters is full strength, it's got 5 hexes. If it's reduced, it's got 4 hexes. That's how far away units can be and be considered in command. And as you would imagine, units that are in command do a lot better and more effective things than units that are out of command. And they get to, sometimes units that are out of command range get a chance to remain in command. They got to roll for it. They take a morale check, yada yada. This morale number here matters a lot. The difference between a 7 morale and a 6 morale is pretty big. The difference between a 7 morale and a 5 morale is huge. And 7 is the highest morale that I've seen in the game anyway. I think it's the highest that there is. Here you got shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles. Here's a Vulcan, an anti-aircraft gun platform here. Leopard 2s, this is probably the most powerful tank in the game. BMP-1s with anti-tank missiles. This little wheeled anti-tank vehicle, right? Like, what is that going to get off one shot before it gets killed? Self-propelled artillery here. We'll talk about all that in a little bit. So, and then these things here are called support weapons. So this is a Milan 2 anti-tank guided missile that would be mounted by or used by an infantry unit. So would the Stinger down here. If you know what they are, you know what they are. This is something called a Songster anti-tank guided missile. I didn't know this, but this is an alternate armament support weapon, which means that armored units could have this. They would be assigned in a scenario. So apparently the Russian tanks at this time had guided missiles that they could shoot out of their barrels or something like that. And I don't know much about that, but they tend to have better range and slightly better hitting power than the cannons do. But some of the armor that the better units have is what's called reactive armor, and so anti-tank guided missiles don't do as well. All right, so I think I've showed you that. Now I'm going to show you a made-up scenario that I have here, and I'll show you some of the units. So in my little made-up scenario, we've got this pretty big force of Russians trying to come over and capture this city. I'll show you this objective here. And a relatively small force of Americans trying to defend the city. And so one of the things that this game has is a battle generator, scenario creator, and so it assigns points to the different units. And the ratio of points is usually about 2/3 of the points for the attacking force, for the defending force, right? So I made this scenario up real quick, and this is roughly, the Americans have roughly 2/3 of the number of points that the Soviets have. And look at the difference that gives them. So I'll just go over this very briefly. This is a pretty typical American infantry company here. Some platoons of infantry with their fighting vehicles. These are the M113s. This is their headquarters unit. Going to talk a lot about headquarters in a minute. Here are some self-propelled artillery units, and their headquarters is what's called a forward observer, so it gets to run out there and call in artillery fire. So you'll see this unit here, a lot of range, right? 65 range. This could be an off-map artillery unit as well. Talk just a little bit about the difference there, but on-map artillery units fire when their formation is activated. Off-map units can be called in by any formation under the right circumstances, but they have fewer uses. And we've got these guided missiles, these support weapons here. This is a TOW, and this is a Dragon. So the Dragon is like the little one-shot kind of mini bazooka. And during combat, the infantry units can deploy these weapons and utilize them. This is a platoon of infantry, so they could have a TOW, and they could have a Stinger, and they could have a Dragon, right? It's not one per unit because, you know, there's plenty of men in there to man these things if they want to. Here's a cool vehicle that I don't really know anything about, the M901 ITV. This is just an M113 with a TOW guided missile mounted on it, and so it sits out there and shoots at tanks until it gets blown up. So we got these Americans here trying to defend the city. A little forward here, we've got some Americans, the Abrams tanks, right? So these are there's one slightly better version of the Abrams in the game. These are the best American tanks. This tank formation has a self-propelled mortar unit behind it. They're set up here in defensive terrain, trying to defeat the Russians. This here, I think, is a Bradley, right? Fighting vehicle. It's a recon unit. And notice this bridge here. You can also have a I thought that I put this out there. You can have a destroyed bridge. Wrong one. Destroyed. That's. Here we go. This is the way it looks. So I'm going to just point that around so you have it point right. So in this theoretical scenario of mine, the Americans have blown these bridges and they put a minefield down here. So the Soviets are going to have to either clear the minefield or get across the river. They'll do that with this awesome unit, the bridging unit, right? This unit, if it survives, gets up here and then deploys itself, and it becomes a bridge. Isn't that awesome? That's so cool. I've never actually successfully done that in a game, but anyway. So then these are the Russians, and here they come. Lots of Russians, right? That's what we all thought was going to happen if World War III ever broke out, was lots and lots of Russians storming at the Americans and trying to overwhelm them, hoping, and the Americans hoping that they'd be able to hold them off long enough for resupply and reinforcements to come, right? If you're listening to this video, you probably read the book Red Storm Rising. I'm going to guess. So this is the blue units are the a formation of 10 platoons of Russian T-80 tanks, the best they've got. Notice that the Russian T-80 is a 12 range with 3 dice and 4 to hit, while the American Abrams is 11 range with 4 dice needing 5 to hit. Now I don't know the odds. I think that makes the Abrams shot a little more powerful, but the T-80s outrange them. But knocking out an Abrams is rough. Anyway, don't want to get all into that. So the Soviet, and then there's an infantry unit here, a mounted infantry unit, and these are in the BMP-1s. So these infantry units here are mounted in these in their vehicles, getting ready for an assault. The plan, I guess, is for the tanks to come up and try to clear the way, get the bridging units deployed. Remember, this one started back here, undeploy, and this is a little mortar unit here, and we've got some support weapons, right? So you see how this works. And here are the helicopters. Now the helicopters are kind of cool the way they do them in this game. This helicopter is in what's called flying mode. So this thing can move anywhere on the map that it wants. It can go from here to here to here to here. But if it moves more than 12 hexes, it cannot fire. If it is going to fire, while it's in flying mode, it's going to use its cannon with rolling 4 dice, with a range of 4, rolling 3 dice and 5s to hit. It's not a super powerful weapon. But what this unit wants to do is get somewhere into position and go into hover mode, and then it brings out the anti-tank guided missile, range of 17 with 4 dice needing 4s to hit. That is a powerful attack right there. The helicopter is easier to destroy when it's hovering, and when it's flying, it's easier to see and probably shoot at with anti-aircraft units. You can also make it fly nap of the earth mode. I'm not going to go into line of sight because I'm terrible with that. But helicopters are really fun in this game, and trying to figure out what to do with them, how to avoid them getting how to avoid them getting shot down and keeping them on board as long as possible. That is a fun part of this game. Now, this back here is this gigantic formation of Russians. These are transport helicopters, and these are air assault infantry, and this is one of the coolest units in the game. This is the ASU-85, a little armored fighting vehicle that is apparently helicopter transportable. It's not going to live very long on its own, but it gives a little bit of punch, a little bit of mobility to the paratroopers when they come storming in and their headquarters. And then here is an airstrike counter. There's different kinds of air support. Here we have another artillery, and here we have another anti-aircraft unit. The Americans over here, they've got here's the Cobra, and I'll show you what the Cobra's got going for it when it's in hover mode. It's pretty potent, right? But check out the Apache, what it's got going for it. A range of 27 with 4 dice needing 3s to hit. That is lethal right there. It could potentially outrange a lot of anti-aircraft weaponry, which is unusual. And then the American, the A-10, there's also an F-111. The Germans have the F-4. This is probably the most potent tank in the game, the Leopard 2, long range, good armor, a 3 to hit number. So if this thing takes a shot at you, it's going to do some damage. All right, and then these counters up here, they represent different things in the game, different types of artillery, so high explosive artillery, smoke missions, multiple launch rocket systems, chemical attacks. The Soviets get chemical weapons sometimes, and they can really lay a hurt. This is air-delivered minefields, which are cool. Dual purpose, whatever ICM munitions are. I thought these things seem to be kind of like high explosive artillery, except they run out a little quicker or something. Here's another fun vehicle, a Jeep with a tow mounted on it. Right, this guy's going to zip out here and take a shot and hope that nobody shoots back, because it's not going to last long. If they do, like with any game, the kind of terrain does things like blocks line of sight, gives you defensive bonuses. When there's an assault, if infantry assault tanks inside a city and the tanks don't have any infantry support, the tanks are at a very significant disadvantage. You know how it works. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the formations and how they activate. And this is, I think, the heart of the game here. So this headquarters unit, as the game starts, does not start the game on the map. It starts the game in this holding box, in the NATO holding box. And what happens is when this formation card is drawn, the player then takes his headquarters and deploys it to any unit that he wants. The headquarters will then stay there until it gets shot up or till something happens to make it leave. At the next activation of this formation, under certain circumstances, the player can redeploy the headquarters to a different unit. The headquarters gives bonuses in rally attempts and adds extra dice. So if this Abrams were to take a shot right now, it will get 2 extra dice, needing its regular hits. There's also long-range fire, which is less effective, and point-blank fire, which can be brutal. Note this improved position here. You can dig some of your forces in. Improved positions are really improved in this game. And so let's talk about the way the formation cards work, and this is going to explain why this is actually an even match. There are something like 55 Soviet units all told deployed here, and there's something like 20 American units. And yet, if you use the point system given in the battle generator, this is, for an attack defense, about an even ratio. Now, why is that? Well, let's zoom out a little bit and go down here and look at the formation cards. These cards are just over here so you can see them. They're not part of this. These are the formation cards that the Americans will be pulling, and these are the formation cards that the Soviets will be pulling. I'm going to bring these all up onto the map so I can zoom in just a little bit more on them. So, a couple things to note. First of all, in this particular, what I've created here, the Soviets have 2 formations with 7 morale. Most of their formations have 6 morale. But it's the number of cards or the number of activations that each formation has that makes a difference. And then this is when you draw this card, you make an airstrike. So the you'll see here that the Americans, with their fewer units, have more activations than the Russians are going to have. Each American unit is going to activate twice, give or take. I'll talk about that in a second. But so that's a force multiplier. In most scenarios that you see created by the game, you're not going to see a lot of Russian formations with extra activations or with 7 morale, although you could. But you also have what are called designated formation cards and scratch force. So a designated formation card, if that's included in the scenario, whenever that card is drawn, the Soviet player is allowed to activate any formation that he wants. And a scratch force would be a collection of units that are not of the same formation put together. That would be by scenario design. So NATO's units almost exclusively have 7 morale and have 2 activations per formation. The Soviet units, for the most part, have 6 morale and a single activation. So, without getting into the math, according to the battle generator, that's why this small number of Americans on the defense is considered to be an equal match for a larger number of Russians. And in my experience playing the game, I'm not good at this game, but over and over again we have seen that and so what that represents is the improved command flexibility of the American forces, or the NATO forces, the improved technology of the NATO forces, and probably better training in general for the NATO forces. Also note here that the 6 morale formations have a shorter command range. So what we understood, at the time at least, about the Soviet doctrine was that they didn't give their subordinate commanders very much flexibility, and they hadn't had a lot of training time, and so they were just kind of going out there as a blunt instrument for the most part. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense, that the way that these cards pull. Now, the way that a turn works is this. It's going to take me just a second to put this together. I should have done it sooner than I did. I'll just do a couple of things here. So you put all of the different formation cards into a deck, and you take turns drawing them, and we'll just pretend that this is what we have left here. And you have to add a couple of other things in here too. There are kinds of cards that do different things. So this is a battlefield event card. That is really fun. Electronic warfare plays a part in things, but the end operations cards are what I'm looking for here. You put, in every scenario, you put at least 2 end operations cards into the deck. And now this deck is shuffled. This module is excellent, by the way. It's really well programmed. A couple glitchy things, but it's very good. And so when it is, and you would put the battlefield event in here, and you put electronic warfare card in here, and during the operations phase of a turn, you draw cards. And so now the Fox company would activate for the Americans, and when they did all of the stuff they were going to do, then the 336 Strategic Helicopter Regiment for the Russians would activate, and then you'd have a battlefield event, and then the electronic warfare would be decided, so that would be a chance for one side to jam the other side's communications. Then the Guards Motor Rifle Regiment for the Russians would activate, and now Fox Company gets to activate again. So see that? So this company has done something and used up all its units, but it gets to go again now. And now the Charlie Company gets to roll, and now the first end operations card comes out, and that means that the next time an end operations card comes out of the deck, the turn ends. So you never know if you're going to get every formation activated, right? So here you get the helicopters get to fly in with their infantry, the Russians get an airstrike, Charlie Company activates again, and finally the turn ends. That was just by circumstance. We can go through this again, and you'll see that Fox was first both times, but it's a different order. Charlie, the Russians, the first end operations, Charlie, the battlefield event, now the turn's over. Now, what cards are left in here? The 336 Helicopter Regiment and the 2 of the 247th Guards Motor Rifle Regiment and the Russian Air Support Counter did not get to activate this turn. So there's a way in the game that you would take those cards out and you would leave, you would take those headquarters out and you would leave one of the end formation cards out of the deck until each of those units had activated at least once. So you cannot have a unit or a formation go 2 turns in a row without activating, which is essential because that could really blow you up. In some scenarios, you add in a 3rd end operations card and you still end the turn when you get to 2. It just makes it more random and variable, which is interesting. Battlefield events, I'll show you up here. Battlefield events are things you roll the dice and it tells you there's the headquarters does something for you. Weather changes on the map. One side, if there's one side, you have to roll for it. One side gets to do the event. If you roll a 7, you go to the battlefield friction, which is usually a little worse. They're everywhere, no mercy, friendly fire, bad navigation. So these things you don't want to win. The events you probably want happening on your side for the most part. So that's a real brief nuts and bolts basics of the game. I'm going to talk in the next part of this about the way that the scenario that I'm playing right now played itself out. One of the things I want to highlight before I do that is the way the headquarters function in this game. So if you ever played Up Front, one of the things I loved about Up Front was reading the designer notes talking about things like the wire card. People used to make fun of Up Front sometimes saying, oh, I'm shooting my wire gun at you because you'd get to play wire on your opponent. That was tongue-in-cheek. But the designers of the game said, look, wire doesn't necessarily represent barbed wire. It represents something happening to that unit that it didn't expect that slows it down. Guy breaks a leg, they fall in a hole, whatever. So I like when things in the game represent something that can be a lot of things. So the headquarters icons in this game, they don't represent the commanding officer. They represent the amount of command resources at any one point dedicated to that formation. Or it could be something like a heroic sergeant jumps up and takes command because the commanding officer is out of touch with the rest of the formation, or there was just a big intelligence dump and this unit now knows a lot more things. There's a lot of things that what that helicopter's token can represent, and so that to me adds a lot to the flavor of the game and the way that you use your headquarters token matters. So it's not a unit, it's a representation of a lot of stuff that's going on, but you can lose it. So I'm going to pause the video here at this point because I've got to go put the kids to bed, and when I get a chance I will make part 2 of this video where I will go through the general flow of the first 7 turns of the scenario that I'm playing solo, talk a little bit about the solo system or the solo assistant that the game comes with, which I like, and talk about how the game creates a pretty tense and interesting narrative. Alright, so that's all for now. I will talk to you in the next video.